James Rollins, great to see you again, and excited to be here talking about our favorite topic, the science of storytelling. But let's take a minute to talk about ourselves and tell me about what you're doing lately. What's your latest book? What's going on? Bring me up to speed.
Well, I'm always I generally do 2 books a year. Right now, I'm working on 2 series, the Sigma series. The new book in that series, Archangel, comes out in August. It deals with a topic that you've covered in one of your books, which is basically the incursion of Russian forces into the Arctic and setting up bases and the threat that Russia has in the Arctic, along with searching for a lost continent that was always sort of rumored to be in the north. And Sigma Force is called in to try to discover if there's any truth behind this long rumored lost continent in the Arctic. And the other side, I'm working on my 3rd book in a fantasy series that'll be coming out next March. The first 2 books in the Moonfall Saga, the Starless Crown and Cradle of Ice, are already out on shelves right now. I think Cradle of Ice comes out in sort of a trade paperback edition next month in April.
Wonderful.
What about you, Mr. Busybody?
I've been not quite as busy as you, but my latest book, Start With Who, that's the cover you're seeing there. That was a lot of fun. This is essentially the next generation, according to some of the critics that have read it, beyond Simon Sinek's Start With Why, which was groundbreaking about a dozen years ago. But now we've got a lot more modern neuroscience. We have some of the new things that the pandemic has brought about, such as hybrid work, et cetera, and just a number of other things that weren't available back then. LinkedIn has taken off. There's just all kinds of things. So this explores why we really need to, from a business perspective, this is nonfiction, of course, but I sprinkle in a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, some of the storytelling science, how you properly use storytelling in a business perspective, how sales, marketing, recruiters can do this, and really any leaders can do this. So I'm pretty excited about this one. And of course, my Spies of the Deep book, as you mentioned, that was the Arctic one. So we both did the Arctic thing. I had the privilege of going up and working with the Navy and going underneath the Arctic ice. That was fun in a submarine, and that's where I got a lot of the background material. But let's delve into this topic of storytelling. I recall many years ago, as a budding writer, I went to the Maui Writers Conference. You probably remember that one.
I do. That's where I got my start.
My instructor was Raymond Ovsfeld, who's come out with some wonderful books himself. And I thought I knew how to tell stories. And I was quickly humbled. Now, eventually, over that several-week course, I was voted most improved, so that tells you how bad I was when I walked through the door. But I did learn a lot about this. And then, of course, spending time with you, I've learned so much more. So let's talk about some of these elements. For example, let's delve into what is theme. And why do we even need to be concerned about or care about the theme of our book? What do you think?
I always had a difficult time answering that question, mostly because I think a little bit of PTSD from my English lit years, where they would ask you to analyze novels and what is the theme of this novel, and so the way I interpret theme is basically, I write these roller coaster adventures, big popcorn entertainment. My goal is to keep, my readers in suspense and keep them turning pages. But I don't think a story works as well. It'll feel hollow, and as soon as you close your book, the back cover, you're going to forget about the book unless you have some resonance. You want that novel to speak to something that is a common condition amongst people, whether it's religion, whether it's morality, whether it's any multiple facets that challenge us in our daily lives. If you can fold in those sort of larger archetypal type of feelings, then when they close the book's going to feel like it has a bit more resonance and it has a bit more depth. But of course, what do you think is a theme? How would you define theme?
I spent some time trying to figure that one out myself, and I also had some confusion there. But I see theme as pretty much what you had mentioned. It's really, what is it that I, as an author, want to impart? If someone closes this book, what do I want them to remember? What's that core message that I want them to take away from the book? For example, let's say a book that perhaps is about love. You might want to say, my theme is about how do I love in a stressful environment in today's world. And for example, if we look at one that I'm sure everybody knows, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, actually written by L. Frank Baum back in 1900. What was his theme? There's no place like home. Right? So that's the kind of message that I think authors try to impart. But I think some of the things that you've mentioned previously is not writing anything you wouldn't want to read, and some other things you said about not jumping on a bandwagon or being cliche.
Exactly. I think that goes across genres pretty much. I always, whenever I'm instructing people, I tell people you should be writing what you love to read. And that's for several different reasons. Readers have a good nose on them. They can sense when a writer's not passionate about what they're putting on paper. And if you're sort of chasing that bandwagon, this subgenre or genre is very popular, therefore I'm going to write this genre, even though I've never read this genre, and maybe I don't even like that genre. It's going to, number one, it's going to feel passionless. It's going to feel like you're just, writing, you're painting by the numbers. But the worst thing is you're going to fall into a bunch of cliches. You think you know what that genre is, but unless you're current, unless you're reading what's going on right now, what you're writing is going to feel outdated. You're going to be dealing with things that are already well trodden, that people are going to say, I've read that type of storyline 1,000 times. So if you're deeply read into a genre, you're going to know when you come up with an idea that this feels fresh. I've read deeply in the genre, and I've never heard anybody write this type of story. It's that type of story that's going to get attention out there, both from the marketplace and again, appeal to the readership of that genre, because they're going to have the same reaction you did. I've never read something like this before. How exciting this is. And if you're writing, again, straying off the path of the well-trodden road, you're going to be a little scared, a little nervous, a little excited, and that's going to come out on the page.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Now, one of the key things, of course, in accomplishing your goal of being able to impart this theme and impart the message you want, and then also get the reader hooked and bring them in, is to understand maybe a little bit of the science behind this. And one of the things that is interesting to me is that we think this modern neuroscience is modern. But Aristotle, years ago, he was a guy that wore fancy bed sheets and threw wild toga parties, if you remember him. He invented the persuasion model, because really what we're trying to do is persuade our audience. What he admonished us to do in speaking to our audience, which is what we're doing as writers, is to balance our message across 3 key areas, which he labeled as logos, pathos, ethos, which means basically logical, emotional, and instinctual. Now, he wasn't a neuroscientist, obviously, but years later, we've learned that we've got 3 parts of our brain that are, guess what? Emotional, logical, instinctual. So it's really balancing that, not having your words be an entirely logical Google research data dump, Right? Ooh, look what I learned. Or it's all emotional. It's just all about the heartstrings, and I'm just up and down with the love scenes or the person being ripped apart emotionally, or it's all instinctual, where it's in a thriller, it's all about action, all about the gun shooting and firing.
Craig, you froze up that. I'm not sure I got everything that you said because there was a little bit of static in the connection. So maybe everybody else heard. I did not hear it. Can you repeat what you said?
It's balancing your message across the logical, instinctual, and emotional things, rather than just having one thing be all instinctual and it's all shoot 'em up and thriller, and one thing being all logical with all the cool data stuff, and then
it definitely you need a balance of that. I get questions asked a lot because my stories do have a lot of research behind them, and as you mentioned, it's hard not to Google dump into your story by having some guy go, "I know you already know this, but I'm going to now spend 5 pages explaining this to you." That might appeal to that logical part, but it just doesn't work in storytelling. You got to find that balance. And so what I found whenever I'm like, well, how do you do that? How do you make it so that you can get that information without realizing with fooling the reader into not realizing you're just giving them a lesson about quantum physics that they didn't know that they were going to get. What I found is playing off those 3 things. Of course, I'm going to give the logical information I need the reader to understand, but I'm going to pitch it as an argument. I'm going to have these 2 characters, personally hating each other, and this is unfolding in a heated discussion between the 2. At the same time, maybe there's a time clock associated with this. There's a threat going on that if they don't get to this conversation finished in a certain time frame, bad things are going to happen. Or if they don't get information, from somebody they're trying to interrogate, bad things are going to happen. So there's that underlying threat also going on. So by balancing those 3 things, you can involve the reader dynamically in the scene versus leaning on one of those 3 things and expecting that to carry the whole load.
Makes perfect sense. I had that same challenge when I was writing Status 6, that book you referred to about the Arctic, that fiction thriller. That does involve a lot of the latest submarine technologies, as well as Secret Service operations and government operations and Navy SEALs and all kinds of cool stuff. And it's easy to get carried away with all that latest techno thriller stuff and the gadgets and the technologies, etc. But you're right, you'll have too many data dumps going on, so you have to sprinkle that around and balance it out. So you've got the roller coaster ride, the thriller parts that are on the edge of your seat, and then you've got some emotional segments, and then you've got some of the interesting information that you impart. But one of the key things that you've mentioned when you're first bringing the reader into your story are the sympathy builders. Yeah. In terms of making sure that your protagonist...
I did not make these up. I was taught this. So these are... I'm always reluctant to share this in too great detail, simply because it makes me sound like a hack. But if whenever you're trying to create a character, if you're trying to create a character that you expect the reader to be attached to throughout your novel, you want them sweating with that character, you want them running with that character, you want them crying with that character, you want them attached to that character. How do you achieve that? And how do you achieve that quickly? I struggled with that, and so I took a little creating character seminar. And this was written by a screenplay writer, or was basically taught by a screenplay writer. And he said, basically, within the first 5 to 6 pages of your novel, when you're introducing your main character, or even sometimes secondary characters, if you're trying to establish sympathy, if you're trying to get that reader in love with that character, attached to that character, rooting for that character, there are some tricks. These are, I recommend you just use them as writerly tools and keep them in your toolbox. Pull them out whenever you're like working on the beginning of a story. And I have sometimes I do that. I'll write a character, I'll flesh them out, and then I'll go, you know what? I'm not feeling this character myself yet. And I'll go back and I'll pull out this list of sympathy builders and see, have I failed? If I've only done one of these, can I fold in another one of those? So let me tell you what those sympathy builders are. Number one, if you can demonstrate that their character is very good at what they do, they're an expert in their profession, they're really skilled, they're really smart, they're impressive what they're doing. For some reason, having that type of expertise gains a matter of respect and a little bit of acknowledgement from your readers. And I use the example of that old television series House. The main character House, he's a drug addicted, foul mouthed, mean, cruel to everybody around him, but he's really good at what he does. He solves that medical mystery that no one else can solve. And because of that, you respect him and you get some feel like you want to be his friend. You want to know who he is and how he ticks. So, the mystery of why is he that much of an expertise begins to draw your reader in. 2, just have your character be funny or humorous. Again, just somebody that has that wise cracking ability to say that one line that you would never think of in that moment, to get that jab just right, or to take somebody out of their knees with some type of joke. You begin to respect that. You like that character because they are funny. Humor always sort of is a warm way of attaching a reader to a character. Number 3, your character simply treats others well. And again, if you see somebody that's kind towards other people, you have a tendency to sort of build sympathy for them. It's a natural reaction. It's a bit of that sainthood type of reaction. Well, he's so nice, I must like him too. Now, the 5th one is sort of a caveat of the one prior. Besides just treating somebody well, if they're treating specifically pets, the kids, or the elderly, simply by showing extra kindness towards that subset, you build even a deeper level of of sympathy. If you have a character walking a door and his dog comes up and greets him and he's jumping on over him, he just sort of walks past him, you're not going to like him that much. If that character, dog loves him and he returns that affection back, seeing that bond on print, reading it, you begin to get that attachment with that character, which leads somewhat into the next one also, is simply have other people in the book like your character. Now, I can never understand this, but, Craig is going to explain why this works. To me, when I read that, I thought, that's dumb. No, that does not possibly work, but it does. If you just have one character liking your main character, for some reason, your brain, and Craig will explain why, will begin to like that character too. The last one is fairly self-evident. Everybody sort of roots for the underdog. So if you can build an underdog element into your character, whether it's a physical, mental, educational handicap that makes them seem like there's no way they can withstand the challenges coming up, you begin to root for that underdog. So again, don't have your character do all of that. Don't have them, they're funny, they're good what they do, and they have all these dogs that love them, and I forgot one of the things is a character has undeserved misfortune. I skipped over that one. We all have undeserved misfortune in our lives, so when we see a character have undeserved misfortune, we can relate to that character. So I always recommend, if you can get 2 of these, I think 1 is not enough. I think you need at least 2 of these character builders. Going beyond that, you have to be a little careful that you don't end up being sort of creating a caricature of a hero versus somebody that feels real. So don't go overboard. But if you're ever questioning why your character isn't becoming alive on the page, maybe pull these out and take a look at them.
Beautiful.
But now you can why this works. Because to me,
Yeah.
I just wrote it down in that class. I just applied it. It worked. Didn't know why.
Now, why does it work? So this has been interesting for me, and I actually didn't know why for a number of years until I got involved in the professional side of my life, more into the neuromarketing side. Neuromarketing is now being used by tons of companies out there, from Coca-Cola to Hyundai to Hewlett Packard, Apple. They all use this to essentially tweak our brains when they message to us. So if you think about a typical story structure, most of us use a 3-act play like Shakespeare: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And about 25% of your story is Act 1, maybe half your story Act 2, and then Act 3 is about 25% of your story. Now, what's interesting here is that as writers, remember we said we had 3 parts of our brain. This is called the triune brain theory, invented by a guy named Dr. Paul D. McLean many years ago. And he mirrored what Aristotle taught us, right? Persuasion model. We want to be a little more emotional and instinctual and logical. And actually, that's kind of how our story unfolds. So we're appealing a little bit more to the emotional part of our brain. It's called the limbic system. And that's really what this does for us. By using these sympathy builders, we're appealing more to that part of our brain so that we get to like or even love our character. If we don't care about the character, then it doesn't matter what happens to him in the story. We don't really care. So we're building some neurochemicals and neurotransmitters when we do that, even if we don't realize that. The primary one here in this first act, where we're introducing our main character, our protagonist, is dopamine. Right? Dopamine is how we like things. We like a really good cup of coffee, it's because it stimulates our dopamine. So if we like a particular character, it's because we as writers, using these sympathy builders that James talked about and other techniques, are building the dopamine in that first act when they walk on the stage. Now, in relation to this first act, you've also talked about some of the things we should do to unfold our story, like maybe starting with some action. Take us through that.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're talking about that, you again, if you ever take a writing class, they're going to all talk about the hook. How do you hook your readers into the story? And I think this, for any up and coming writer out there, I think this is more important than anything. There's a book called The First 5 Pages by Noah Lukeman. I recommend it. It's very short. It's a very thin book. I got it somewhere on my up there, actually. You can read it in a day. But basically, Noah Lukeman is an agent who's gone through many, many, mountains of slush piles. And within the first 5 pages, he can tell when this story isn't going to work. If you can't hook that agent within the first 5 pages, especially if you're Stephen King, they might give you 10 pages. But if you're a new writer, you only have 5 pages. And you have to basically get things going in a dynamic fashion, establish that sympathetic character as soon as possible. Now, they talk about the opening line, that opening hook. What can you do to enamor that reader immediately into the story? You got to be careful with that. Again, I've read a lot. When I'm teaching writing, I've done seminars. And sometimes, people think I got to have that really dynamic hook. That opening sentence got to start with a gunshot. It's got to start with something immediately. You got to be careful with that. I'm going to think of an example, like so and so killed his 3 people in 5 minutes, and then next line is something like, oh, and he was born in so and so, and his mother and father were Baptists. If you have an over excited hook, it's hard to go from there. The goal with your hook, your opening line, is very simple. You just want to raise a question in your reader's mind. You want them to go, what does he mean by that? Or what is that going to lead to? So they're going to want to read that next sentence and the sentence, the next paragraph, that next first pages. So you want to basically just raise a question that only is going to get answered if that reader continues to read. So that's your goal of your hook. Again, another issue that a lot of people have when they're new writers is they think they have to tell the readership everything in advance. They think they got to set up the whole story. They gotta get the background of all the characters established. No, start with action. Readers trust their authors that eventually I'm going to get clarity. So what you want to do is sort of intrigue your reader with a little question. Don't delay too much on getting your plot started. Get some things going very quickly, and trust that your readers are going to trust you to fill in the blanks later on. But during other lulls, you can start filling those blanks. So that's the best way, I think, is to sort of get that sympathetic character established, raise a question in the reader's mind, get that action moving, and you can start filling the blanks in later.
One of the key words that you just mentioned is trust. We want our reader to not only trust us, that they're in the hands of an experienced writer, of course, and this is going to be a fun and engaging book. I think most of us, we get through the first few pages of the book and we can kind of tell whether or not we're really going to want to hang with this particular writer in this story. And you also want to be able to trust your protagonist. And you may not know a lot about them, but you want to trust that this is somebody that you would like to get to know and like, and also hang with throughout your story. And trust building throughout your story is also key, because your protagonist needs to maybe learn how to trust if they don't currently have that ability. Maybe trust some of their co-protagonists as they go. How do we build trust, and what is that? Well, what we now know from neuroscience is that trust is directly related to a brain chemical we all have called oxytocin. If it's high, we can trust, and if it's low, we don't. So we're building oxytocin, and there's all kinds of cool ways we can do that. We don't have time to go into all of them, but creating environments where you are showing that certain things or actions or people can be trusted. And what can also be fun is maybe having somebody that you think you can trust, and later in the story you realize you can't trust them. That's also fun. They flip, but that's all done by making sure you understand how oxytocin is built. And I'll leave you with this. A really cool way that you can build trust is with cheese. Now, you can't do that with your writing, but there are these tyrosine crystals in cheese that actually increase oxytocin. So if you are at a author signing somewhere, make sure they have platters of good cheddar, like an aged cheddar cheese or a manchego that's got some tyrosine crystals in it, and they'll trust you and want to buy your book.
I'm going to just, as a former veterinarian, I have access to oxytocin for inducing pregnancy and reducing delivery. So I'm just going to go ahead and just inject people as they come into the readership. Why bother with let's go right to the direct source. You don't need to.
That's right. Forget the cheese. We're just going right to the shop. I'm with you on that one. Let's do that. All right. Well, let's move into act.
Can I backtrack just a quick second? Because one thing, again, maybe you're going to talk about this later. I don't know how you're going to fold this in. But going back to, because I find this fascinating, and I just wanted to share it. I talked before about how the weird fact that if you have one character liking your main character, the reader begins to like that main character. And you talked before about something called mirror neurons. I don't know if you want to expand upon that, because that's the answer that I never knew, but I think it's fascinating. I think you should share it.
That's true. And that is a good point, because as you are introducing your protagonist, and you've mentioned this before, showing them doing something. For example, walking the old lady across the street, or maybe being nice to a child. That is triggering what we call mirror neurons. And where this came from is a university in it's in Italy, right? It's where they make Parmesan cheese and good Parma ham. So I actually traveled there to learn more about this. really just eat the cheese. But I also got to learn more about this. And what I discovered was fascinating. They were doing experiments using monkeys, one of them named Lucy. They had an fMRI on Lucy's head, and one of the assistants left it on, went to go get an ice cream, came back, and was eating the ice cream. And the monkey started mimicking her, and she could see the areas of the brain on the screen from the fMRI lighting up in the same areas as if the monkey was actually still eating the ice cream. They did further experiments with peanuts, and then they moved to people, and they discovered these things called mirror neurons, which essentially is, and it can happen with us. Sometimes you're talking to someone and you'll start scratching your nose like this, and they'll start scratching their nose or whatever when you're in your ear, and we kind of mimic. Or I won't admit to this, but maybe we're watching a really tearful movie and we start crying in the movie. It's because we're moved to the emotions that we see. Those are mirror neurons. That's what's happening here, as James had mentioned, when you show a protagonist in a situation where someone likes or loves them, or they're showing some love or maybe doing something nice for someone. So good point. So now let's move into Act 2 and talk a bit about the middle of the book, which is the part I know we both love, where and by the way, James is an expert at this, where we torture your protagonist. Let's talk about torture.
Well, I mean, that is the whole goal of the middle act. The first act, you establish that character that everybody now loves because he's got a dog that loves him, and he helps elderly women across the street, and his other characters love him. You basically built this nice character. You have this hero that exemplifies a lot of these features we just described, but also we learn that he has a flaw. He has, he's human. He's not the superhuman character, because we can always relate when the character has flaws. So the goal of the middle act is to challenge that hero and his support staff in every way you can think, not just physically, but also emotionally, pinging that flaw. So basically in the course of that, besides, I often get notes from readers saying, "Oh, you were so mean to that character, but I really enjoyed it." The problem is that they want to see your character challenged. They want to see the creative ways your characters and this group get over these hurdles. Also, your middle act should not be static. We should find out that these challenges are varied in regards to whether they're pinging him emotionally, whether they're pinging him physically, whether they're pinging his morality, whether they're pinging that flaw. They should be different, and they could be a combination of both in each thing. But the key thing is those roadblocks that the hero needs to get over to accomplish whatever he wants to accomplish. They need to be higher and higher and higher. If the roadblocks are about the same height, it's going to feel a little bit. It'll feel a little bit rote. Feels like it's going to get a little tired. You want everything to be a little bit more challenging. And one way you can make that more challenging, besides just the threat being larger, is the cost to get over that roadblock has to be higher. There's got to be a cost to get over that roadblock. They don't get a free pass to get over one of those roadblocks. Something's got to happen. Maybe the first block, somebody gets badly injured in the team. Maybe the second block, somebody dies in that team. Maybe the third block is somebody that's very close to that character is now, personally threatened because of actions that the character just did. So as the threat goes up, so should be the cost of getting over those. A lot of fun things I always mention, just again, just trying to avoid the repetition that can occur in the middle act, where it feels like the same thing's happening over and over again. Besides building those roadblocks higher and higher, mix things up. I've got 181 Doc Savage novels back here as a pulp writers from the 30s and 40s. Read them in junior high and high school when they did these Bantam reprints. But I read a quote from Lester Dent, who was the real name of behind the pen name of Kenneth Robeson, who wrote the Doc Savage novels. The quote basically said, you should never kill your characters the same way twice. Every battle's a gun battle. Every battle's, just people shooting each other. It's going to get tired. A good garroting every now and again just spices things up. You want to have things, you want to vary things up a little bit so that the threat's not coming from the same sort of level of technology even. Mix that up. Also, it's important, I think, to understand the difference between surprise and suspense. Both are effective in that middle act. You want to surprise your reader and you want to hold your reader in suspense. Surprise means you're going to just have something shocking happen that's out of the blue. They open the door and a tiger leaps out. Everybody jumps. If it's a movie theater, everybody jumps in the theater. Same thing happens to the reader. The reader's shocked what happens. They get a jolt, and that's good. That's effective. But it's not as effective as suspense. And I used this analogy that Alfred Hitchcock once used to describe the difference between surprise and suspense. Cut to a scene. It's a restaurant, a little diner. Two characters, walk into the diner. They go and sit at a table. They're having a conversation, just a very mundane conversation. Maybe, again, he's trying to give some information out to his viewership that's secretly, he's sort of sliding in there. But in the middle of that, when the coffee is being served, the table blows up. Everybody in the theater jumps because they were not expecting that table to blow up. They're shocked. That's effective, but what's more effective, according to Mr. Hitchcock, is before those characters walk in, pan down and see the bomb ticking underneath that table. The characters then come in, same scene as before. They sit down, they have that same conversation, mundane conversation. Maybe they're trying to give information out, but now it's fraught with tension through the entire, seconds, minutes of that entire scene, so that the readership is or the viewership that's going to go off at some point, or is either going to die, are they going to escape? It's that suspense that really just grabs the throat of the reader or viewer. Now, you don't want everything to be suspense. You don't want everything to be telegraphed in advance. You do want mixed surprises and suspense throughout that middle section, so that you keep your reader on his toes. You've sort of shown, I'm going to show you some of the things that are going to happen, but I'm still going to surprise the crap out of you. So you want them always on edge, even when they think, okay, I don't think anything's going to happen here because Jim has not shown me that bomb under the table for this scene, but he surprised me before, so I'm still under tension, even though I have not revealed what that surprise is going to be. Because I have surprised them in the past, the suspense is still there. It's buried underneath, it's trickling underneath the surface because I've surprised them in the past. They don't know if I'm going to surprise them again. So by mixing that up, you really keep the readers on edge about these scenes, or just ratchet up that tension. It really involves that reader. That's my middle act.
Gotcha. Diana Gabaldon is a master at torturing her characters. I think she used to work in a dungeon, if I remember correctly. But what's actually going on here from a science perspective is quite fascinating. I interviewed Dr. Paul Zapp, who's a neuroscientist, not only for my Start With Who book, but also my leadership book. And what he's done is actually a number of clinical experiments to understand what's going on. Also, London Business School has done this as well. And what we've discovered is that while we're building that tension, while we're escalating some of the torturing that we're doing in our second act, we're building a brain chemical called cortisol. And that elevates our awareness. We're also building norepinephrine or noradrenaline, which also increases our awareness. It's just a normal biological reaction that goes all the way back to the cave people days when we were trying to stay away from the T-Rex. If we're in a dangerous situation, our senses are heightened. So we're more aware, but we're also paying more attention. So we're retaining that information. What's that do for you? it makes the reader sticky, which is what you want. You want them turning the pages at midnight and sticking to your book. And this is what happens in our brain. We become sticky. We're very focused and paying attention. And London Business School actually found that if we do that correctly with the proper storytelling elements, we can increase the retention, what we remember, by 10x. So from a business perspective, think about that from your business communications and how that can be impactful as well. But as we start to wrap up our little storytelling adventure here, let's talk about bringing this to a close in Act 3 and having now a bit more of a logical conclusion. So again, in Act 2, we're impacting our instinctual brain a little bit more. It's called the reptilian complex, fight or flight. Now we're going to move into Act 3, get a little bit more logical, and we're going to start impacting our neocortex, which likes a little bit more of the numbers and the facts and things of that nature. It's Sherlock Holmes when he comes in and walks on stage and he wraps everything up all nicely and logically. So take us through that in terms of what happens in Act 3.
Well, I think the key word that you had there is logical. Is that the key? If you have a bad ending of your novel, no matter how much that you attach that readership to that character, no matter how much you torture them in the middle and create this suspense, if you don't land that book, it's going to sour all of your efforts prior to that. So it's really important, how do you stick that landing? And one of the things is you need to recognize that your readership is smart. If the ending feels illogical, it feels like it's contrary to everything that you've set up before, the characters are doing things that you just don't see them doing because you've set them up so well that they're doing things that seem out of character for them. It feels like you're forcing your character to go down a path that they wouldn't go on normally. It's going to ring false. If the final resolution of your book is more of a hand of God, where it's, I'd said, something out of the blue that saves the day, that's going to dissatisfy the readership. They expect it's your hero, it's your main character, it's your protagonist that needs to carry that story to its conclusion. So, whenever we talk about writing, they talk about the darkest hour. It's that last hurdle that the characters have to get through. And it's the time where your reader thinks there's no way. They're defeated. I don't see how they're going to get out of this. But of course they must, or it'd be a very sad ending. So again, how do you make that work? Number one is the resolution has to come from that main character. Those prior roadblocks, it's great to have assists from the supporting characters, but when it comes to that last roadblock, the main character has to do the heavy lifting. Ideally, because you've created a flawed character and his flaws have been pinged and challenged by that antagonist, ideally, to get over that hurdle, to really feel like it's a satisfying conclusion, the character has to face that flaw. It's facing that flaw that becomes sort of the critical thing that helps him get over that last hurdle. If you can pull off that ending, that's that twist, that ending that feels like, oh my gosh, I did not see that coming. That surprised me. And it moved me emotionally. The great way of doing that also is to do what I call plan it early and pay it off later. You want to plant something early in the story that becomes critical to get over that hurdle. So when it happens, the reader goes, oh, I forgot about that earlier moment. But now that you brought it up, how clever it was that the character was able to pull that out of the blue. And that, of course, then resolves the issue. Again, how do you do that? How do you land that where you have the character getting over that hurdle, facing that flaw, pulling something out from earlier in the novel that helps them get over that is the key, I think, at this point is you need to know your ending. I'm not a big plotter. I don't plot in great detail. I work from a relatively skeletal outline. I know the beginning, I know the end, I know some of those roadblock tent poles that are going to hold up the story, but I don't necessarily have to know how A connects to B connects to C. But I need to know my ending. I need to know how that's going to land so that if you know your ending, you can build towards that logical solution that Craig just talked about. So it satisfies the reader from an emotional standpoint because he's faced that flaw that we all have flaws. So when we see a character overcome that flaw, it feels great. Physically, they get over that hurdle by finding something that surprises you early, so they seem, from a logical standpoint, very smart. And also your point at that point then is once you sort of get over that hurdle, things are resolved. The other key, and this is important too, get off the stage. I've read a lot of novels where the story ends, but there's many pages of them sort of, glad handing each other, dragging the story on needlessly. The key at this point is once the story's over, the story's over. And you as a writer need to acknowledge that and respect the readership and get off that stage. If you can do all of that, then I think you'll have a nice resolution. Everybody will be happy. It looks like at this point, I've noticed Craig seems to have vanished off my screen, so I think he may be gone. So I think that was reaching the end of our conversation. We covered the beginning, we'll cover the middle, and now we just finished the end. Well, there's Craig. Hey, Craig. I was just about to sort of sign off. I was trying to talk my way.
Not a problem. I think what happened,
stretching that out. I did talk about, while you were gone, I talked about the ending and about setting planning it early, paying off later, making sure it's not an anticlimactic ending, the resolution for become the hero. And again, the key is to know your ending. One thing I did forget was another way of really ratcheting up that tension of that last moment is I mentioned planning it early and paying off later, but also what's also fun to plan early is a timer. Is set something in that thing that there's something that's been accomplished by a certain time, and then suddenly and shockingly, that time frame is shortened. We've all seen it. Every movie where they're trying to defuse that bomb, and you see that little timer, and it's clicking down, and they're like, oh no, they're never going to make it. There's no way they can make it. And they tweak something, and all of a sudden the timer goes faster or drops in half. Suddenly the time frame that you thought they had is shrunk. And all of a sudden you just, there's a gas. Now they're just screwed. So if there's a way of building a time, besides planning something early that's going to pay off later, if you can build a timetable, a little timer into that ending, it's really effective at ratcheting up that tension. I just don't want to forget
Beautiful.
that.
Now, what's happening, and we'll wrap here real quickly, is we're building serotonin and GABA in our brains. And we can also effectively use color. So throughout, there's color spectrums. And in our Act 1, lighter yellows and greens and light blues. So if you're describing someone or a scene and you want to paint a picture that raises dopamine and oxytocin, those are great colors. In Act 2, you might want to use more reds and oranges and blacks and things of that nature. That'll help in building that tension. And then in Act 3, there's a reason why they paint insane asylums with a deeper blue color, because it's calming. That's helping to raise the serotonin. Deeper blues, maybe some purples, indigos, those kind of colors will help. So again, if you've got a picture in your book, you can do that, but you can just describe those colors or have them using those colors. And then your word choice is also important. We found that using specific words can help bring to life pictures. And if you don't believe me, think about a lemon, a sour lemon that you're chewing on right now. And if you're not salivating, then you are a zombie or have learned how to avoid lie detector tests. But a word like rose connotates a smell in your brain, whereas maybe button doesn't. So these are just, again, a few neuroscience tricks that you can use as you go. And if you want to read more about what those tricks are and how to blend them into your storytelling, it's in my book, Start With Who. It goes through that, not only for writers, but for anybody that's using this in business, for example. And you can also learn more about how to apply that in business. This book spurred a wonderful company, veteran-owned, called Remotely Me. You can learn more about how to use this in business at that website as well, remotelymee.com. And anything else, James, that you've got on your mind in relation to helping everyone understand how to structure your story and turn it into a top bestseller?
Again, this is more of a general concern, not concern, but it's a recommendation, is that we've talked about all these levels of building a story. You're never going to do it in your first pass. You're going to have to go through and, editing. I mean, writing is rewriting. I always, have people that I've been teaching writing to, where they will just keep working the same pages as opening pages over and over and over again and not continuing forward. They think they've got to have that everything, ticking along perfectly in that first pass of writing. A lot of times you're not going to know what you need to change in that first part of the novel until you've written the last word of your novel, until you know what threats you're going to, that character is going to follow. And that's going to change over the course of writing the story. Like I said, I work from a skeletal outline. I think even when I talk to outliners who do outline in great detail, they drift from that outline. They will stray because that's what the characters are going to take them. And so to try to make your writing perfect from the get-go, that every page you write is going to be what's going to be printed on the book when it comes out, is not reasonable. I always recommend write your entire book before you really worry about trying to do everything we just discussed. Keep it in the back of your mind, work on your story, and then go, how can I make my story better? Then watch this over again and then see what you can do. If there's a way you can punch up the sympathies, a way to build up that, add some more suspense versus surprise. Is there a way to, plant things early that are going to pay off later? You're not going to know that until your book is done. And, on my desktop, I have a little sticky note that says, today I give myself permission to write crap. Don't expect when you're writing your writing day that it's going to come out scintillating prose that's perfect from the get-go. Just write. And you can worry about all those, fine-tuning all that after you finish a novel. You're just wasting your time to keep just circling that same spot over and over and over again, thinking that eventually it's going to come out perfect. You're just not going to know until you're over here. That's my final recommendation.
Makes sense. Well, thanks for joining us today. We hope you gained some great knowledge that will help you in your writing career. And remember that there's no place like home. So go home right now and start writing. And hopefully you'll remember all the wonderful things that you learned today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.